Imagine a fighter aircraft so capable, so revolutionary, that it changed the entire balance of air power over Europe. A machine that went from an unimpressive, almost disposable early design to one of the most feared and respected aircraft in the history of aviation. And imagine that the transformation, the moment that turned an average plane into a war-winning legend, came down to one bold decision: one engine swap. This is the story of how the American P-51 Mustang, originally considered mediocre and even flawed, became the long-range escort fighter that broke the Luftwaffe's back, and how that transformation happened only because someone dared to merge American airframe engineering with a British heart, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine. To understand how dramatic this transformation truly was, we must rewind to 1940. Britain was desperate. The Luftwaffe had ravaged much of Europe, the Battle of Britain was raging, and the Royal Air Force needed fighters, fast. So when the British Purchasing Commission approached North American Aviation, asking whether they could build Curtiss P-40s under license, they expected a simple yes. Instead, the Americans boldly replied, "We can build you a better aircraft, and we can do it quickly." The result was a crash design effort unlike anything before. In just 117 days, the first prototype, the NA-73X, was ready for testing. And visually, it was stunning. A sleek, low-drag fuselage, a laminar flow wing ahead of its time, and excellent aerodynamics. On paper, the Mustang should have been a masterpiece. But early versions of the plane, powered by the Allison V1710 engine, faced a fundamental problem. The engine simply couldn't breathe at high altitude. Below 15,000 feet, the Allison Mustang was fast, maneuverable, and handled beautifully. But above that altitude, the power curve fell off a cliff. And in 1940 and 1941, high altitude is exactly where the war was being fought. The RAF quickly realized the issue. They loved the Mustang's speed on the deck. They admired its range, which was far superior to Spitfires and Hurricanes. Recon pilots praised it. Ground attack squadrons were thrilled. But as an interceptor, as a high-altitude fighter, the Allison-powered Mustang simply wasn't good enough. Still, the airframe had something potential. An aerodynamic cleanliness and fuel efficiency that no Allied fighter could match. And the British, observing this, began to ask the question that would change everything. What if we put a different engine in this? That different engine was the Rolls-Royce Merlin, the heart of the Spitfire, the key to British survival during the Battle of Britain, and the most advanced high-altitude piston engine of the war. It had a two-stage, two-speed supercharger that transformed performance above 20,000 feet. Where the Allison suffocated, the Merlin thrived. But replacing an aircraft's engine wasn't just a matter of bolting on a new power plant. The Merlin produced more power, ran hotter, and required different cooling systems. The engine mount, the cowlings, the intercooler ducting, everything had to change. It was a bold experimental move. But in 1942, the RAF approved the test. The moment the first Merlin-powered Mustang, designated the Mustang X, lifted off, the pilots knew something extraordinary had been born. Suddenly, the aircraft wasn't just good, it was magnificent. Climb rate skyrocketed. High-altitude performance transformed. Speed jumped dramatically, especially at critical interception altitudes. The combination of the American airframe and British power plant was nothing short of revolutionary. The British report after the first flights reads like a love letter. "This aircraft, fitted with the Merlin engine, is outstanding." That one sentence would alter the course of the air war in Europe. The Americans took notice too. Packard began producing Merlin engines under license, and the P-51B and P-51C arrived, the first Mustangs truly worthy of the later legend. But the transformation wasn't just about performance numbers. It was about what this new fighter made possible. For the first time, the Allies had a fighter capable of escorting bombers all the way to Berlin and back. Before the Merlin Mustang, American bomber crews flying B-17s and B-24s suffered catastrophic losses deep inside Germany. The Luftwaffe's fighters, free from escort interference, would tear bomber formations apart. Entire groups vanished in single missions. The USAAF knew this couldn't continue. Without long-range escort fighters, daylight bombing campaigns were doomed. But then, the P-51 arrived. It didn't just escort bombers, it dominated the skies around them. When the Luftwaffe scrambled fighters to intercept American bombers, they suddenly found themselves ambushed by swarms of Mustangs with vastly superior speed, climb rate, and range. Luftwaffe ace Adolf Galland famously said, "When the P-51 appeared, we knew the jig was up." The impact was immediate, measurable, and devastating to the German Air Force. Within months of widespread Mustang deployment, Luftwaffe fighter losses skyrocketed. Veteran pilots were killed faster than they could be replaced. Training pipelines collapsed. The German air defense system, once feared, began to crumble. But let's take a moment to talk about why the Merlin Mustang outclassed so many German fighters, including legendary names like the Bf-109 and FW-190. First, speed. The P-51B with the Merlin engine could exceed 440 miles per hour under ideal conditions, faster than many German interceptors at key altitudes. Second, range. No fighter in World War II had the Mustang's legs. With drop tanks, it could fly over 1,600 miles. It wasn't just long range, it redefined what long range meant. Third, high-altitude dominance. Thanks to the Merlin's two-stage supercharger, the Mustang delivered maximum power where bomber escorts needed it most, around 25,000 feet. Fourth, aerodynamic efficiency. That laminar flow wing wasn't a gimmick. It reduced drag dramatically and gave the Mustang superb high-speed performance. Finally, pilot visibility and handling. Mustangs had excellent cockpit ergonomics, and later models added the bubble canopy, giving pilots a near 360-degree view. The combination meant that German pilots entering combat against P-51s faced a near-hopeless fight. Even elite aces admitted the Mustang was an opponent they respected and feared. But perhaps the biggest testament to the Mustang's impact comes not from the Allies, but from the Germans themselves. After the war, numerous Luftwaffe officers stated that once the P-51 appeared in large numbers, Germany effectively lost the air war. And all of this, every bit of this reputation, this dominance, this technological triumph, hinged on the moment someone decided to marry an American airframe with a British engine. Without the Rolls-Royce Merlin, the Mustang would have remained a low-altitude ground attack aircraft. Useful, yes, but not the legend we know today. Instead, it became the aircraft that escorted bombers into the heart of Nazi Germany, destroyed the Luftwaffe's fighter arm, enabled overwhelming Allied air superiority, and helped pave the way for the D-Day landings. It became the aircraft that pilots adored for its beauty, its responsiveness, and its deadly efficiency. It became a symbol of Allied cooperation, British engineering and American manufacturing coming together to produce something that neither nation could have achieved alone. But to truly understand how profound this transformation was, we must look even deeper into the engineering, the politics, and the battles that shaped the Mustang's evolution. Because the story doesn't simply end with an engine swap, it begins there. And so to appreciate the full weight of the Mustang's transformation, we need to go to the front lines, to the skies over France, Belgium, and deep into Germany, where the P-51 Merlin Mustang would carve its legacy into the history of air combat. Picture a bomber stream, hundreds of B-17 Flying Fortresses and B-24 Liberators stretching across the sky like a glittering highway. Engines roaring, formations tight, wings shimmering with condensation in the cold air above 25,000 feet. Below them, cities, forests, rivers, and enemy territory. Deep enemy territory. Before the Merlin Mustang, these formations were vulnerable, left exposed once earlier escorts turned back for lack of fuel. German fighters would swarm from every direction, diving down from cloud banks and sun angles, tearing into the heavy bombers. Some bomber crews never made it past their first few missions. The casualty rates were staggering. But once the Merlin-engined P-51 began flying escort, everything changed. Now, as the bombers crossed the coast and headed inland, the skies no longer belonged to the Luftwaffe. Instead, they belonged to the sleek, shark-like silhouettes of the P-51s flying above, around, and ahead of the bomber formations. Mustang pilots didn't just defend the bombers, they proactively hunted enemy fighters. They engaged early, high, and aggressively. They fought the Luftwaffe on their own terms, often before German fighters even came within firing range of the bomber streams. German radar operators would watch their scopes and see fast-moving contacts racing toward their interceptors, cutting them off, forcing them into defensive fights. The psychological shift was immense. What had once been a predictable battle, Luftwaffe fighters attacking bomber formations freely, had suddenly become a deadly contest in which German pilots were outnumbered, outperformed, and constantly on the defensive. Mustang pilots often described the thrill and terror of those early engagements. "We could run them down," one pilot recalled. "If a 109 dove away, we were right behind him. If a 190 tried to climb, we matched him. The Merlin gave us the power we needed. We felt like we could fight anything." Another pilot put it more simply: "The Mustang gave you options, and in a dogfight, options keep you alive." These weren't exaggerations. The climb rate, acceleration, and high-altitude power of the Merlin transformed how American pilots engaged the enemy. Luftwaffe ace Johannes Steinhoff later said, "The P-51 was superior to our fighters in almost every way." Coming from a man with more than 170 aerial victories, that wasn't idle praise. It was an acknowledgement of the transformation the Mustang embodied. But let's delve deeper into the engineering that made this possible. Because the Merlin Mustang's success wasn't magic. It was the culmination of some of the most advanced aerodynamic thinking of the time. First, the laminar flow wing. The Mustang's wing was one of the first operational uses of this concept, designed to keep airflow smooth over a greater portion of the wing's surface. This reduced drag considerably, especially at high speeds. The Mustang wasn't just fast because of engine power. It was fast because it sliced through the air with a kind of aerodynamic elegance that other fighters struggled to match. Second, that radiator scoop under the fuselage, famously misunderstood by many people. On the surface, it looks like a drag penalty, a big bucket sticking into the airflow. But the Mustang's radiator used a principle known as the Meredith effect. As air passed through the radiator duct and heated, it expanded and accelerated. Positioned correctly and engineered precisely, this actually generated thrust, small but significant. Essentially, the radiator helped offset its own drag. The result? More speed, more efficiency, and better range. Third, the cockpit and pilot ergonomics. Many WWII fighters were cramped, visibility was limited, and controls required significant pilot muscle. The Mustang, especially later variants with the bubble canopy, gave pilots exceptional outward visibility, a crucial advantage in dogfights. Controls were smooth, responsive, and harmonized, meaning pilots could maneuver quickly without overcorrecting or fighting the aircraft. Fourth, the fuel capacity and efficiency. The Mustang's internal fuel tanks, combined with drop tanks, allowed it to roam across Europe with unprecedented range. Fuel consumption of the Merlin at cruising settings was remarkably efficient. This wasn't an accident. It was the result of meticulous engineering choices. Now let's return to the battlefield. By the winter of 1943 and early 1944, American bomber crews were still reeling from heavy losses, particularly from missions like Schweinfurt and Regensburg. These missions had torn into the German industrial base, but at an enormous cost. Losses were so high that the viability of daylight bombing was questioned at the highest levels. Then came Operation Argument, better known as Big Week, in February 1944. This was the true trial by fire for the Merlin Mustang. During Big Week, American bombers launched massive, repeated strikes against the heart of Germany's aircraft production. Messerschmitt factories, ball-bearing plants, and assembly lines for the Me-410 and other fighters. The Luftwaffe had no choice but to respond. They threw everything they had in the air. Veteran aces, new recruits, experimental aircraft, every available pilot and machine was sent up to defend German industry, and the P-51 was waiting for them. Mustang pilots dove into combat with a ferocity that shocked German commanders. They pursued enemy fighters aggressively, engaging them far from the bomber formations and disrupting their carefully coordinated attack patterns. For the first time, American escorts weren't just protecting bombers, they were taking the fight directly to the Luftwaffe's doorstep. The results were devastating. German fighter units suffered heavy losses. Replacement pilots, poorly trained due to fuel shortages and rushed instruction, were overwhelmed. Big Week is now widely seen as the beginning of the end for the Luftwaffe's ability to contest Allied air dominance. And the Mustang's role? Pivotal. Without the long-range escort ability of the Merlin Mustang, the deep penetrations into German airspace would have been impossible. Without those raids, the Luftwaffe might have recovered, might have rebuilt, might have continued to inflict catastrophic losses on Allied bombers. Instead, the Luftwaffe entered a death spiral from which it never recovered. One German ace later summed it up bluntly: the P-51 was the coffin nail of the Luftwaffe. But the Mustang was not just a bomber escort. Once it had broken the Luftwaffe's fighter arm, it became the vanguard of air superiority across Western Europe. Mustang groups strafed airfields, attacked trains, pounded convoys, and shredded retreating ground forces after D-Day. Its versatility became legendary. It was fast enough to chase down V-1 flying bombs, tough enough to absorb significant damage, and agile enough to win close-quarters dogfights. And yet, perhaps the most remarkable part of this story is how close the world came to never seeing the Merlin Mustang at all. Had the British not taken the initiative to test the Rolls-Royce Merlin in the Mustang airframe, had the Americans insisted on sticking with the Allison engine, had politics or pride interfered, the P-51 might have remained a footnote, a good low-altitude attack aircraft, nothing more. Instead, it became one of the greatest fighters in history, widely considered the finest all-around piston-engine fighter ever built. And it did so because two nations, under the pressure of war, set aside ego and collaborated on an engineering masterpiece. The Mustang is a symbol of innovation, of cooperation, of daring to combine the best ideas from different worlds: American aerodynamics and manufacturing, British engine genius. Together, they produced a fighter that not only changed the war, but also defined an era of aviation. In the final year of the war, as Allied forces pushed across France, Belgium, and into Germany, Mustang pilots gained near-total control of the skies. They roamed freely, destroying enemy aircraft on the ground and in the air. Luftwaffe pilots often refused to engage unless they had a clear advantage, which by 1944 was rare. Many German aircraft were destroyed before they even left the ground. By the time the Allies reached Berlin, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self, and the Mustang had played a central role in that collapse. There's a famous saying among bomber crews: "We knew we were going home when the Mustangs showed up." Those silver bodies and yellow-trimmed noses were more than just airplanes. They were hope, protection, and the promise of survival. And so when we look back at the P-51 Mustang, what we see isn't just a machine. It's a story of transformation, of potential unlocked. A reminder that innovation often comes from unexpected combinations, from daring to ask, what if we tried this? Had the Rolls-Royce Merlin never been fitted into the Mustang, the course of the air war over Europe might have been very different. But because someone took that chance, the Allies gained not just a fighter, but a war winner. The P-51 Mustang didn't just fly into combat, it flew into legend, and the roar of its Merlin engine became, in many ways, the soundtrack of victory.